It was a humid summer evening when I first noticed it. The sun had long since set, casting the small town of Ravenswood in a warm orange glow. My friends and I were huddled around a campfire in the woods, swapping stories and laughing as we tried to scare each other. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As we chatted, the fire crackled and spat, sending sparks flying up into the darkness. And then, without warning, it stopped. The flames died down to nothing more than a faint smolder. We looked around at each other, confusion etched on our faces. "Did you guys feel that?" someone asked, their voice trembling slightly. We shrugged it off as mere paranoia, but I couldn't help feeling like we'd just experienced something unusual. As we packed up the remains of the campfire and headed back to our cars, I caught a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, a figure, tall and imposing, standing just beyond the tree line. I spun around thinking it was one of my friends playing a prank, but they were all staring at me, confused. I shrugged it off as a product of fatigue, exhaustion from a long day of hiking, and headed back to my car. But that night, things got weird. As I drove home through the winding roads of Ravenswood, I noticed that every street light seemed to flicker, casting an otherworldly glow over the deserted streets. I pulled into my driveway, feeling like I was being watched by unseen eyes. And then, as I stepped out of the car and onto the grass, I heard it. A low hum, like the buzzing of 1,000 bees. It was so loud that I could feel the vibrations in my chest. I spun around, looking for some source, but there was nothing. Just an empty street, bathed in the eerie glow of the streetlights. As the days went on, things only got stranger. Doors would slam shut on their own, and I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. My friends started to experience it too. Strange noises at night, objects moving on their own. We knew that something was happening in Ravenswood, but we had no idea what. And then, one night, I received a package in the mail. It contained a small, ornate box with a note that read, "For the curious." Inside the box was a small piece of paper with a single word scrawled on it, "Echoes." I knew then that we were dealing with something much bigger than just simple paranormal activity. We were dealing with a presence, a force that was watching us, waiting for us to uncover its secrets. And I knew that I had to be the one to do it. I'll never forget the summer I spent at my grandparents' old farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. It was a place of endless fields, rusty silos, and creaking barns that seemed to whisper secrets to each other in the wind. My parents had sent me there for the season, hoping the fresh air and wide open spaces would do me some good after a difficult year. At first, everything seemed normal enough. I spent my days exploring the property, helping Grandma with her famous tomato sauce recipe, and trying to catch fireflies in mason jars. But as the weeks went by, strange things began to happen. It started with little things, doors opening on their own, the sound of footsteps on the stairs at night, even when no one was there. I chalked it up to the old house settling, or maybe just my imagination running wild. But then, objects started moving around. My favorite book would be sitting on the table 1 minute, and the next it would be gone, only to reappear in some new location. At first, I thought it was Grandma playing a prank, but when I confronted her about it, she just smiled knowingly and said, "Oh, that old house is full of surprises." One night, as I was walking back from the barn, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure, tall, gaunt, and impossibly thin, was standing in the kitchen window, staring right at me. I froze, paralyzed with fear. The figure didn't move or speak. It just kept watching me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. When I finally managed to stumble back inside, Grandma was sitting on the couch, knitting a blanket like she hadn't a care in the world. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked, her voice as calm as the summer breeze. When I told her about the figure, she just patted my hand and said, "Oh, that's just Old Man Jenkins. He used to live in this house back when it was new." Old Man Jenkins? Who was that, and why did he haunt our farm? Grandma wouldn't say any more, just smiled and changed the subject. But I knew what I saw, and it wasn't just my imagination playing tricks on me. As the days went by, the activity intensified. Lights flickered, shadows danced on the walls, and disembodied whispers echoed through the corridors. It was as if the farmhouse itself was alive, stirring up some ancient malevolence that refused to be quieted. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of there before something, or someone, really bad happened. As I packed my bags to leave, Grandma handed me a small, ornate box. "Take this," she whispered. "It'll keep the old house calm until we come back." When I opened the box, I found a small photograph of Old Man Jenkins staring out at me with those same glowing eyes. I left that place, and the strange occurrences stopped as suddenly as they started. But sometimes, in my dreams, I still see that figure watching me from the kitchen window. And when I wake up, I can almost smell the fresh cut hay and hear the whispers on the wind. I never believed in the supernatural until I moved into that old Victorian house on Elm Street. At first, it seemed like a great deal. Cheap rent, plenty of space, and a rich history to boot. But as soon as I started unpacking, I began to notice strange things. It would start with little things, doors slamming shut on their own, the sound of footsteps creaking up and down the stairs when no one was around. I wrote it off as the typical settling of an old house, but then the occurrences started getting more frequent and more intense. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find my bedroom window open, even though I knew I had closed it before bed. Or I'd see shadowy figures darting out of the corner of my eye, only to vanish when I turned to look directly at them. The strangest thing, though, was the photographs. I'd take pictures of myself or the house, and then discover that they were altered. Someone, or something, would be added to the frame. A ghostly figure in the corner, a creepy grin on my own face. At first I thought it was just some kind of prank or a glitch with my camera. But as the changes kept happening, I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. One night, I woke up to find my bedroom bathed in an otherworldly light. The air was thick with an eerie energy, and I could sense that something was watching me from just beyond the edge of perception. That's when I saw her. A woman in a long, flowing dress, her face deathly pale, and her eyes black as coal. She floated towards me, her presence filling the room with an unspeakable dread. I tried to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. The woman reached out a bony hand and touched my forehead. And suddenly I was flooded with visions of the past. The people who had lived in this house before me. The tragedies that had befallen them. And the unquenchable darkness that lurked at the heart of it all. When the vision faded, I was left feeling shaken and confused. The woman was gone, but I knew that she would return. And as the days went by, the paranormal activity only intensified. Doors started slamming shut on their own. The sound of footsteps grew louder and more frequent, and the photographs continued to change, revealing glimpses into a world beyond our own. I didn't know what to do or who to turn to, but I knew that I had to get out of that house before it was too late. But as I packed my bags and prepared to leave, I caught one last glimpse of the woman in the photograph. Her eyes fixed on me with an unblinking stare, her presence drawing me back into the heart of darkness. It started with the whispers in the dead of night. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees outside my apartment window. But as the days went by, the sounds became more distinct. Whispers, really. A soft murmur that seemed to be carried on the breeze, though there was never any discernible pattern or meaning. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just some kind of neighborhood prank or overactive imagination on my part. But as the whispers grew louder and more frequent, I began to feel a creeping sense of unease. It was as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate with me. It wasn't until I started experiencing the other phenomena that I realized the whispers were just the tip of the iceberg. Doors would slam shut on their own, usually when I was alone in my apartment. At first, I thought it was just the old building settling, but as the slammings continued, I began to suspect otherwise. I tried to document everything, dates, times, descriptions of what happened, but it was also subjective and unreliable. And then there were the shadows. Dark, wispy tendrils that seemed to seep from the walls and floor, twisting and writhing like living things. I'd catch glimpses of them out of the corner of my eye, only to turn back and find nothing. The final straw was when I woke up one morning to find strange symbols etched into the walls of my apartment. They looked like some kind of twisted hieroglyphs, pulsing with a faint, malevolent glow. I knew then that something was very wrong. I tried to leave, to get out of there before it got any worse. But every door, literal and metaphorical, seemed to be sealed shut. The whispers had grown louder still, a maddening chorus of voices speaking in hushed tones. It wasn't until I stumbled upon an old newspaper article from the 1940s that I began to understand what was happening. A family had lived in my apartment complex back then, and they'd been driven mad by some kind of supernatural presence. The article spoke of the Whispering Woman, a malevolent entity that haunted these very halls. As I read on, the shadows seemed to grow longer and darker, twisting around me like living vines. The whispers grew louder still, until it was as if the entire apartment complex was speaking in unison. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything went quiet. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. And when I finally mustered the courage to turn around and leave, the symbols on the wall were gone. Erased, it seemed, by some unseen force. But I knew better. The Whispering Woman was still out there, waiting for her next victim. And I had a feeling that I wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. The old mansion had been abandoned for decades, its grandeur and beauty slowly being consumed by the passing of time. The once manicured lawn was overgrown with weeds, the paint chipped and faded, and the windows boarded up. But it was the strange occurrences that kept people away. I first heard whispers about the house from my grandfather's old friend, a local historian who claimed to have seen things moving in the shadows at night. I didn't believe him, of course. Small towns like ours are full of rumors and told tales. But when I started working on a project about the town's history, I stumbled upon an old newspaper article from 1922 that mentioned the mansion and its infamous owner, Malcolm Grimstone. Grimstone was a recluse who had made his fortune in the coal industry, but rumor had it he was obsessed with the occult. People said he would summon demons and make pacts with dark forces to further his business interests. The article described how local residents began reporting strange happenings after Grimstone's death, objects moving on their own, disembodied whispers echoing through the halls, and a feeling of being watched everywhere. Intrigued, I decided to explore the mansion for myself. With permission from the current owner, a distant relative of Grimstone's, I spent an afternoon exploring the dusty rooms and cobweb-covered furniture. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rot, and I could feel a malevolent presence lurking just out of sight. As night fell, I set up my camera equipment to capture some footage for my project. That's when things started to get weird. At first, it was just little things. Doors creaking open on their own, the sound of footsteps coming from upstairs even though no one was there. But then, I started capturing strange orbs and wispy shapes on film. The next day, I reviewed my footage and noticed something disturbing. A figure in the background, always lurking just out of focus. It didn't seem to be moving like a normal person, more like it was floating or suspended in midair. When I zoomed in, the figure seemed to be watching me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as I continued to explore the mansion and review my footage, I realized that something was very wrong. The strange occurrences weren't isolated incidents. They were happening everywhere, all at once. One night, I decided to spend the night in the mansion, hoping to capture some more evidence of the paranormal activity. As I set up my equipment in the grand ballroom, I felt a presence drawing near. Suddenly, lights flickered and dimmed, and the figure from my footage materialized right in front of me. It was Grimstone himself, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly energy. He spoke to me in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. "You should not have come here," he hissed. "Now you will never leave." I tried to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The last thing I remember is Grimstone's cold, calculating smile as he reached out to claim me. It started with the noises. At first they were just faint whispers in the dead of night, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator and the creaks of the old house settling. But as the days went by, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It was as if someone, or something, was trying to communicate with us. I lived in a small town nestled in the heart of rural America, where the closest city was an hour's drive away, and the nearest neighbor was half a mile down the road. My family had inherited this old Victorian from my great-aunt, who had lived here for over 50 years before passing on. It was a strange place, with creaky floorboards and musty smells, but it had a certain charm to it. At first we thought nothing of the whispers, just the house settling, or maybe some stray animal making its presence known. But as the nights wore on, the whispers grew more frequent, more urgent. It was like someone was trying to tell us something, but we couldn't quite make out what they were saying. That's when things started getting weird. Doors would slam shut on their own, and lights would flicker in the middle of the night. My siblings and I would wake up to find our bedrooms dark and cold, with an unsettling feeling that someone was watching us from just beyond the edge of perception. I tried to brush it off as mere paranoia, but there was something about those whispers that got under my skin. It was like they were calling out to me specifically, drawing me in with a siren song. I started having trouble sleeping, and when I did finally drift off, I'd wake up with this overwhelming feeling of dread. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed a flashlight and a tape recorder and set out to investigate the source of the whispers. I crept through the dark, dusty hallways, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the attic, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. It was like they were coming from everywhere at once. I cautiously pushed open the attic door, and a warm breeze wafted out. The air was thick with the scent of old books and mothballs. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner, tall and gaunt, its face a death's mask of pale skin and sunken eyes. The whispers stopped as soon as our eyes met. For what felt like an eternity, we just stared at each other. Then, in a voice that was barely audible over my racing heart, I asked, "What do you want?" The figure slowly nodded, its eyes fixed on me. And then, it spoke. Its voice was like a rusty gate creaking open, and it said, "Get out while you still can." I turned and ran, not stopping until I stumbled back into the bright lights of the kitchen. It wasn't until later that night, when I replayed the tape recorder, that I realized what the figure had been saying. Not get out, but go to something. And then it hit me. The house was a portal. The whispers were trying to guide us through the veil into some other dimension or realm. And we just caught a glimpse of what lurked on the other side. It was a typical Friday evening when I stumbled upon the old farmhouse. The sign creaked in the gentle breeze, reading Raven's Rest in faded letters. As I stepped out of my car and onto the cracked asphalt, an unsettling feeling settled over me. The air seemed heavy, with the scent of decay and rot. I had always been drawn to the supernatural, and this place was rumored to be one of the most haunted locations in the country. Local legends spoke of strange noises, unexplained movements, and eerie apparitions. I couldn't resist the urge to explore the farmhouse and uncover its secrets. As I approached the creaking front door, a chill ran down my spine. The wood seemed to writhe beneath my touch, as if it were alive and trying to shake off my presence. I hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open, revealing a dimly lit hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. The air inside was stale and musty, heavy with the scent of old books and forgotten memories. Cobwebs clung to chandeliers, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Every creak of my footsteps echoed through the empty halls like a death knell. I wandered from room to room, searching for signs of life or disturbance. But there was nothing. No furniture, no belongings, just an endless expanse of dusty floorboards and faded wallpaper. It was as if the house had been abandoned for decades, left to rot and decay. As night began to fall, I decided to set up camp in the kitchen, surrounded by old cookbooks and forgotten appliances. The silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the occasional creaking of the wooden floorboards beneath my feet. It was then that I started to notice things. Doors would slam shut on their own, the sound echoing through the empty halls like a scream. Footsteps whispered past my ears, but whenever I turned to look, there was no one there. And in the darkness outside, I saw shadowy figures darting just beyond the reach of the porch light. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew that something was amiss. Raven's Rest had a presence, an aura of malevolent energy that seemed to seep into every pore of mine. As the night wore on, the activity intensified. Objects began to move on their own. Pots and pans clanging in the kitchen, books falling off shelves in the library. And then I saw her, a figure standing at the edge of my vision, shrouded in darkness. I froze, paralyzed with fear as she drifted closer, her face twisted into a grotesque grin. In that moment, I knew I had to get out, fast. I grabbed my backpack and fled, not stopping until I was back in the safety of my car, speeding away from Raven's Rest as if my life depended on it. As I glanced back in the rearview mirror, I saw the farmhouse looming in the distance, its windows glowing with an otherworldly light. I knew that I would never forget the horrors that lurked within those walls, and that someday I would have to face them once again.